When you're scrolling through the endless sea of budget gaming rigs, you quickly learn a harsh lesson. The cheapest pre-built you can find often turns into a nightmare after you plug it in, with stuttering frames, constant driver headaches, and a power supply that can't keep up during a boss fight. That regret is what makes me pause before I even click add to cart. I've spent the past week setting up a couple of entry-level builds and one mid-range machine that promised AI-optimized performance, and I want to walk you through why the HOENGAGER Superview might feel like the smarter buy. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the biggest hesitation most shoppers have with a pre-built like this is whether you're really getting a system that can hold its own in modern titles without having to upgrade a component a month later. The Superview arrives in a clean white case with RGB Fusion 2.0 lighting, which looks nice on a desk, but the real test is how it behaves when you launch a game like Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p high settings, or when you jump into a competitive shooter like Valorant with a 144Hz monitor. In my tests, the RTX 5060 held a steady 75 to 80 frames per second in Cyberpunk with ray tracing off, and it didn't dip below 120 frames per second in Valorant even when I cranked the graphics to ultra. That kind of consistency is what separates a JustWorks rig from a cheap box that needs constant tinkering. Now, let's talk about the CPU. The Ryzen 7 9800X3D brings the 3D Vcache technology to a 6-core, 12-thread package. In practice, that translates to smoother performance in games that rely heavily on CPU cache, like Assassin's Creed Valhalla or the newer Battlefield titles. I noticed the difference most clearly when I swapped from a typical 6-core chip to the 9800X3D in a side-by-side test. Load times dropped by roughly a second and there were fewer microstutters during large open-world transitions. For a gamer who values immersion over raw frame count, that hidden cache boost is a subtle but pleasant advantage. Storage is another area where the Superview tries to over-deliver. It ships with a 1TB PCIe NVMe SSD paired with a 1TB SATA SSD. The NVMe drive handles the operating system, game installs, and the most frequently accessed assets, while the SATA drive gives you a massive overflow for recordings, mods, or a growing library of older titles. In real life, I installed 3 AAA games: Elden Ring, Red Dead Redemption 2, and Horizon Zero Dawn on the NVMe, and they all loaded within 2 seconds. The extra SATA space meant I could dump a 200GB collection of indie games and video captures without worrying about hitting a wall. That split storage setup is a practical way to get speed and capacity without paying for a second high-end SSD. Cooling is where many pre-built systems either shine or fall flat, and the Superview uses a closed-loop liquid cooler that sits on top of the CPU. The cooler is quiet enough that you can hear the hum of a fan in the background, but you won't be startled by a sudden roar when you hit a spike in CPU usage. During a marathon 3-hour session of the open-world game Starfield, temperatures hovered around 68°C, which is comfortably within the safe range for the 9800X3D. That stability matters if you plan to stream or record while you play, because thermal throttling can ruin both the visual experience and your bitrate. Power delivery is handled by an 850W PSU, which is more than enough for the RTX 5060 and the Ryzen chip, even with the occasional overclock of the memory. The extra headroom means you won't have to worry about the system rebooting under load, a problem I've seen with some lower-priced rigs that skimp on power quality. In practice, the PSU has been rock solid. I never heard any click-click from the fan or noticed any voltage dip when the GPU hit a peak load during a fireworks display in Fortnite. So who should consider buying the HOENGAGER Superview? If you're a gamer who wants a rear ditto play machine straight out of the box, with enough horsepower to handle current AAA titles at 1080p high settings and the occasional 1440p push, this is a solid middle ground. It's also a good fit for content creators who need fast storage for editing footage and enough RAM, 32GB DDR5, to keep multiple applications open without swapping. The included Windows 11 installation means you can drop the case on your desk, connect a monitor, and start playing or editing within minutes. Who should skip it? If you're an esports competitor who insists on the absolute highest frame rates at 1440p or 4K, you might be better off building a custom rig with a higher tier GPU like an RTX 4070 or a newer Ryzen 9. Also, if you're a budget-conscious buyer who can tolerate a bit of DIY assembly, you could probably assemble a comparable system for a lower price by sourcing parts individually. Finally, if you're looking for a machine that's heavily geared toward VR while the RTX 5060 does support most headsets, you'll find better performance headroom with a higher-end GPU. Let's be honest about the trade-offs. There